I really don't have any idea what to say. This is the first YouTube video that I've done in a long time that's completely unscripted. I didn't even write notes for this. There's some people who have that talent for just being able to turn on a camera and they're able to just look into the camera and talk and be able to sound coherent, but I can't do that. Normally everything I do is scripted word for word, so I have no idea how this is going to go. Anyway, the reason why this video exists is because today is my birthday, July 24th, which is why I didn't create a video for Friday. My birthday is on Saturday, so I figured I'd use the Saturday video for Friday. But these birthdays, these kind of stupid milestones that we go through every so often, they have a way of causing us to reflect on our lives. I guess the who, what, when, where, why, and how we are, if that makes any kind of sense. And one of the things about being reminded of where we are exactly on the timeline of our lives is that it often causes us to think about where we are in our lives in other ways, creatively, professionally, socially, emotionally. And I'm sure it's not too uncommon for people to think that they're not as far along in their lives as they want to be at this certain point, or as they think they expected to be at this certain point. And those feelings could be both irrational and rational. So, for example, the younger version of you could be impressed at where you ended up at this point in your life. Like for me, for example, I grew up below the poverty line, and I would imagine that the younger version of me would be quite impressed at how much value the world projects onto all of my creative skills that I basically taught myself over the years. I mean, I had access to certain resources, but for the most part, I went out and learned those things, and now those skills command a certain amount of money that I would say the younger version of me thinks is pretty good. But the insecurities that come with believing that you might not be where you expected to be at this point in your life could also be rational in the sense that the current version of you knows you better than any other version of you that's existed since you were born. So today me knows a lot more than a week ago me knew, and a week ago me knows a lot more than a year ago me knew. So if the today version of me were to do an honest assessment of where my life is right now, I would say I really am not where I should be financially yet, and I'm definitely not where I should be socially because, as those of you who know me personally, you know I'm pretty open about my loneliness. I'm in my 30s and have never been in a relationship. In fact, I've only ever once been on what I could even call a second date. So in that sense, I am still, my maturity level when it comes to dating, I'm still basically a middle schooler. Now, I'm not going to go too deep into my history of loneliness and dating, or at least my attempt to date. I actually the other day wrote this sort of big long script that I was going to intend to share with you guys, but the more I wrote, the more that each talking point just turned into more talking points. So if you imagine each of these being a talking point, it would just branch out into more talking points. And then before you know it, I didn't even have a script. I had basically the outline of a book or a feature-length film. And so it seemed like I kept chasing something that, kept getting further and further away. And I realized that it's just not yet ready for the public yet. So maybe that's a big project for the future, but maybe today we could go a little bit into my loneliness and depression and dating history. Now, this is a subject that's really hard to talk about, but not in the way that you think it is. It's not like emotionally difficult to talk about. It's just technically difficult to talk about because there's a lot of things in this area that are really hard to communicate to people who don't really understand what I go through when it comes to this issue. And it takes a lot of patience on my part because for an arbitrarily long period of time at the beginning of these conversations, I have to field all of the cliche advice that's along the lines of, have you checked to see if it's plugged in? Have you checked to see if it's turned on? Because apparently, when you've had a lifetime of loneliness and struggling with dating, people seem to think that you're just making these egregious blunders that no one else is making, and that you're not just a victim of certain circumstances that the vast majority of the population that's successful in dating is not a victim of. Or let me correct my English, are not victims of. Which one of those is correct? I'll have to go back and watch the tape to see which one of those is correct. See, even when I go off script, I'm kind of like, I have to try not to get into these little nerdy tangents that have nothing to do with what I'm talking about. See, this is why I usually have a script. Anyway, back to our regularly scheduled programming. So, when I say circumstances, I'm talking about things like socioeconomics. Oops, did I just hit the microphone? Anyway, socioeconomics, race, ethnicity, culture, all of these things that people conspicuously want to avoid when it comes to dating and relationship and courtship discourse. It's like people want to ignore the effects of growing up black in predominantly white and Latino communities, where you would occasionally hear from peers, this girl thinks you're cute for a black guy. And of course, if you combine that with growing up below the poverty line, then you don't exactly have a bunch of shiny objects that you can use to impress your middle school and high school classmates enough to ignore the stigma that comes with going out with one of their black peers. And there were notable exceptions to this, of course. It's not like the girls at my high school wouldn't date any black boys. It's just that every one of the black guys I knew at school who had girlfriends, they were all on the football team, and I was not on the football team. It's not like I didn't have a choice to be on the football team. I mean, here's a fun fact for those of you who I went to high school with. They probably didn't know that I was actually sort of recruited to join the football team. I think the coach had seen me play basketball one time, and he got this sort of perverted look I noticed when he was watching me shoot hoops alone, and he approaches me with this smile and says, "How would you like to join the varsity football team?" And I, said no thanks, because I had really no interest in playing football, and that was that. And it's not my only chance. I probably could have just walked on the team if I wanted to, but I just really had no interest in playing high school football. But I'm not going to go down that tangent either. I'm just saying that is an example that status can actually help you when it comes to dating in high school. Though given the fact that I've been over 6 feet tall since 10th grade, and I've got these sort of large hands, I'm sure they could have found a very obvious spot for me on that team, but that's beside the point. What's funny is I was kind of hoping to avoid this rabbit hole, but here we are, so we might as well keep digging. So not dating as a teenager in middle school and high school is not the end of the world. You get a fresh start as soon as you graduate from high school in many areas of life. And so when I went to junior college, that definitely gave me a fresh start. The problem with junior college is that I felt a lot more poor in junior college than I ever did in grade school, because suddenly, even though I wasn't completely on my own, I was still living with family members, I felt like I had to be a little bit more resourceful, and everything just felt stretched so thin that the idea of ever having a romantic partner in junior college was just completely out of the question, which is a little annoying because the junior college I went to was actually pretty diverse, and I did meet a number of women who showed pretty obvious interest in me, and I just couldn't do anything because I just didn't have the money to, take any of them on a date, also I didn't have the social skills to really escalate with them, because a lot of those dating social skills, you do usually learn in high school if you were lucky enough to date in high school, but I was not. In fact, I may or may not have mentioned this in my video about my junior college experience, but in case I didn't mention this, I did drop out of junior college twice, largely due to financial struggles. And so if you have to drop out of college twice due to financial struggles, you probably also don't have enough money to take anyone on a date. So there's that. In fact, I actually recall one of my junior college track teammates responding to one of my Facebook posts where I complained about loneliness, I think way back in 2009, and he said something along the lines of, "You don't have to have money to date women, you could just ask them out to the park." And I thought to myself, I can't think of a relationship that's ever developed from a man asking a woman out to dates at the park. Because eventually you're probably going to have to go on to a different on a different kind of date. Unless you're lucky enough to find the 1 in a billion woman who you find attractive enough to date, but also somehow doesn't have any options she feels are more valuable than the one who's just taking her to the park every week. See, this is the kind of advice that I get from people when it comes to dating. They give me this fairy dust unicorn type of advice that just doesn't apply in the real world. So we continue down this rabbit hole, and this rabbit hole takes us to my UC Berkeley days. And UC Berkeley is not unlike any other phase or chapter of my life, and that it taught me some really harsh realities of dating and the way women approach dating. And I have to usually tread carefully here because whenever I talk about this, I have to make it clear that I don't blame women for any of my dating problems or any of my loneliness problems, because they're going to do what's best for them. And it's kind of like a luck of the draw. If you like someone and that person happens to like you, then you're in luck. And if you like someone and that person happens to not like you, then you're out of luck. And that's just the way dating goes. But it's also a little bit more complicated than just two people either liking each other or not liking each other. I live on a street that has a whole bunch of clubs, and so people tend to get a little bit rowdy at nighttime, especially on a Friday night or Saturday night. Anyway, about those harsh realities, at UC Berkeley, I often wondered why so many women there would praise me for my looks and my personality, yet trying to get any one of them to go out on a date with me was like pulling teeth. Yet so many of them would date men who these women would openly admit that they're not attracted to. And it was only after meeting a number of these women who would openly admit to dating men they weren't attracted to that I realized that a lot of these men had one thing in common. They had the word engineering in their majors. And for me, I majored in something that didn't exactly scream earning potential. And of course, there's a whole race and ethnicity thing again. I believe year after year, UC Berkeley has under 2% black population, compared to the rest of the country, which I believe is somewhere in the 12 to 14% range. So let's just say there are not a lot of black students. There are especially not a lot of black students who aren't athletes. And so when you're black, your dating pool isn't very big because there just are not going to be very many women there who will consider you a viable partner. And it's not so much that there's racism at play or lack of attraction for men in my demographic. It's more so that if a woman is attracted to me, there's some things that she's going to have to consider with me that she probably isn't going to have to consider with either a white male or a male of her ethnicity before considering me a potential partner. The most obvious consideration, of course, being her parents, who are not only going to be of a previous generation, but are probably going to be more socially conservative than she is, and probably didn't imagine sending their very high-achieving daughter to school to date someone who's majoring in something that probably isn't going to land him a very high-paying job from their perspective. And of course, there's life after college, which for me is sort of defined by two distinct chunks. There was the 3 years after college where I sort of fulfilled that art degree prophecy of really struggling professionally, struggling to find not just any career, but basically any job at all. But then when I finally broke into my current industry, I had to sort of relearn how to date. And of course, not being part of any organizations that are conducive to dating. I'm not really sure what organizations are conducive to dating. It's really hard to date as an adult. I, of course, turned to the apps like, Bumble and Tinder and OkCupid and all those other stupid dating apps. And of course, despite the number of dates that I went on as a result of those apps didn't yield any results either, because for whatever reason, those apps, like the very nature of those apps, actually makes dating even harder than it should be for whatever reason. It's supposed to make dating easier, but it actually makes dating harder in many ways. And one of those ways is the fact that women are basically treated like commodities on these apps because there's way more men on the apps. And so the companies that create these apps understand that they're able to sell these men these premium services so they could get their profiles in front of more potential partners. And the women understand that since they're way more valuable than the men are on these apps, that they could basically be a lot more selective. And it creates this climate where I, and frankly the vast majority of men who sign up for these apps, are just not going to be good enough. It doesn't matter that I'm a 6 foot tall former collegiate athlete, former model with 5 college degrees, one of them being from the top public university in the world. Every single woman who sees my profile is going to believe that someone better is just a swipe away. So it's not too uncommon to meet someone on one of these apps, hit it off, and then either get ghosted or told that this just isn't going to work out. So the reason why I talk about loneliness is because it is the number one reason for my depression. And depression is something I've been battling since, probably preteen years. And I imagine that loneliness and depression has had a large impact on other areas of my life, particularly, my life as a creative, my life as a designer and an artist. And mental health is really quite intertwined with the creative disciplines, with the creative professions. And I know I talk mostly about design on this channel, and I haven't really discussed the relationship between mental health and design, or the relationship with mental health and being a creative. And I'm probably not going to, because I know a lot of people's eyes are going to glaze over if I do that. So I'm just taking the opportunity to do it in this video, because it's unscripted, and I didn't really know where I was going to take all of this. So I'm trying to come full circle and introduce something related to art and design here. So maybe this whole discussion will actually make some sense in the grand scheme of the things that I tried to communicate online or through online video. And I just want to communicate that it's pretty common for people to enter the creative professions as a way of channeling an inner darkness into something that's positive that the world could benefit from. So, I actually don't have a way of finishing that sentence. I thought I was going somewhere with that. But anyways, these are the things I tend to think about on a regular basis. I guess the things that I don't write down, but they go through my mind. This is the first time I decided to, put my stream of consciousness onto camera. I have no idea how this is going to be received. Given the lack of engagement on my other videos, I guess it can't be too much worse than that. So if I think of something creative, I'll make a video out of it. But thanks for joining me for my birthday. I guess, do I have any other thoughts? No, that's it.